Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the second shelf and to another recent reads on Sunday video in which I discuss a couple of the books that I've read recently. And the first book I want to talk to you about is a book that I've just finished yesterday, Saturday, and that is Prodigal Summer by Barbara Kingsolver, published in 2000. Now, Barbara Kingsolver, you all know, very well-known American writer. She's a biologist by trade, and her books are always issue-heavy, so to speak. She has quite something to say about the environment, about colonialism, if you look at Poisonwood Bible, for instance. But this one is indeed, the issue is the environment and nature and the place of the human being in nature. I read this book as a buddy read with Jacqueline over at 6 Minutes for Me and Doris from All the Books. I'm sure they will have upload. Take a deep breath and then try to make a whole sentence. I'm sure they will make their own reviews and upload them. It was a mixed bag, but let me first tell you what the book is about. I read this for the Reading Women 2019 challenge, and then for the prompt a book set or about Appalachia. I know very little about that specific region, Appalachia, so it was the last prompt I had to fulfill. Yeah, me. And this book is indeed set in southern Appalachia, West Virginia, around a mountain, Mount Zebulon. There are three storylines that alternate back and forth throughout the book. The first one is called Predators, and there we have our main character, Dina Wolf, a ranger, divorced 2 years ago, a city girl originally, a very educated woman, biologist, like the author, who secluded herself in this cabin on the mountains, and she works as a ranger. The second storyline is called Moth Love, and there you have Lusa, who is married to Cole, and they run a farm together when fate hits. And Cole dies. That's happening really early in the book, so that's not a spoiler. Lusa as well is a very educated woman. She was a scientist, and then when she married Cole, she moved to the farm. And the third storyline is also situated in the city down from the mountains, like the story of Lusa and Cole, and that's Garnet, an old curmudgeon man in his 60s, 70s, who has this ongoing fight, but not physical, but fight with his neighbor, also an elderly woman called Nanny. So we go back and forth and we learn about their lives and their struggles. And Dina, up in the mountains as a ranger, meets a young man, Eddie, who's coming over from Oklahoma, I think, or was it Wyoming? I'm bad with places, you know that. And the whole book is about how to deal with nature. Should we kill the predators like the coyotes, like Eddie wants to, or is that not a good idea? And if you hear me struggling to tell you what the book is about, then it is because there is virtually no plot. There are stories we learn about the characters' lives, their background. We learn, for instance, with Lusa about their family relations. And the writing is beautiful, and the idea behind it, how does the human being fit in within nature, and how should you conduct your life if you are part of nature, whether it's be as a farmer or whether it's as a ranger. That is all very interesting, but there is virtually no plot. And at times, that really, really bored me. So I think it's not the book's fault, but it was not really a book for me. But if you are interested in that kind of, farm life, nature life, wildlife exploration, and beautiful writing, then I can certainly recommend it. Um, I also try to get a little more, information about life in the mountains, Appalachia, and I saw a documentary called Mountain Talk, which is available on YouTube, and I will leave a link down below. So if you're interested in that subject, that video is certainly worthwhile watching. And if you are not a plot person and don't mind a 450 page book where not a lot of plot is happening and where but the writing is beautiful, then this might be a book for you. The next two books I want to discuss with you, I read both of them for Women in Translation Month. August is Women in Translation Month, so I try to read at least I incorporate half of the books that I read, women in translation. I made a video about my reading plans. I will leave a link to that down below. And the first book, or one of the first books that I read, is Memory Police by Yoko Ogawa, translated from the Japanese by Stephen Snyder and published just a couple of weeks ago. Yoko Ogawa, you might be familiar with her name, is a Japanese writer, and her book, The Housekeeper and the Professor, made the rounds and still makes the rounds on BookTube. The Memory Police is a dystopian book. It's set on a remote island. We never really learn where the island is and what kind of island it is. And on that island, things start to disappear, and the memory of those things disappear with them. So whether it's ribbons or roses or letters, stamps, little things at first. And we follow an unnamed narrator, a young novelist whose father had died, and the mother was arrested because the mother is one of the people whose memories didn't disappear. So you have normally, when an item disappears, the people lose the memory of that item. But there are some people who don't lose the memory, and the mother of the narrator was one of them. And there's also an editor, the editor of the young novelist's novels, and it turns out that this editor is also one of those people whose memory doesn't disappear. The memory police is looking for those people, arresting those people, and taking them away. We don't know what happens, but you can assume that it's nothing good. So the editor at a certain point is in danger, and the young novelist takes him in and hides him in a room, in a very tiny room in her apartment. And then more and more things start to disappear, and the memory police gets more and more vicious in looking for people. So that's basically the plot line. I'm not going to, of course, tell you how the book ends. That would be mean. I loved the writing style and the very atmospheric, kind of claustrophobic idea of things going missing and how that affects the lives of people. It's beautifully written. My issue with the book, you know me, like I just talked about the King Solver, this if the plot is not making sense to me, always, then I have a problem. And with the Memory Police, even though things go missing, the narrator, if it suits the plot, if it suits the storyline, she sort of remembers that they go missing. And that didn't make sense to me. And it took me out of the book a lot of the times when the narrator then talks about how the roses disappeared. And then I'm thinking, how does she remember that? She should not remember the roses. So that sort of spoiled the book a little bit for me. But if you're not that kind of reader who always questions, every twist and turn in the plot, and you like the idea of the setting and the beautiful writing, very allegorical, then you will certainly enjoy The Memory Police. The second book for the Women in Translation Month reads that I want to talk to you about is Kate Roberts' Feet in Chains, translated or retranslated, I should rather say, from the Welsh by Katie Greenwich in 2012, and the original Welsh book was published in 1936. I read this together with Sean from Sean the Book Maniac, and I have very little knowledge of Welsh writers, and Sean, one of Sean's reading projects is, read more Welsh writers. So I was happy that I could, read this book with him. Kate Roberts is obviously one of the most famous Welsh writers that I have never read or heard of, so shame on me. And Feet in Chains is about rural life in Wales, in a little town, a village, a farming village, but also there is a quarry, so there is the men go work in the quarry. So it's about that life, that setting. The book is not very long. It's about 200 pages, but it spans several decades. It starts in the late 1900s, in the late 19th century, around 1870, and we meet our main protagonist, Jane, who has just married Ivan, and then the book follows their family life, the children, the 6 children that they have, and it goes all the way up to the end, almost the end of the First World War, 1918. As you can imagine, the book, like I said, is quite short. So in order to cover such a time span, there are quite some jumps in time. So one chapter will end in 1899, and the next chapter will be 5 years later. It's made clear, those jumps are made clear, so you don't have to think, where am I now? But there's these big jumps. And it seems to be the story of my reading life recently. Again, there is no plot. Sean rightfully pointed out, but there are a lot of stories, which is true, because we learn about the marriage, we learn about when the children grow up, and then the First World War comes. So there are a lot of stories, individual stories, little anecdotes, snippets about Jane and her husband, but also about the children, especially the older children, Owen, William, Aileen, and Shaunette. But there is no, what I call a plot, an overarching red thread of a story. It almost reads like a collection of interconnected short stories. Each chapter is almost a story in itself. What I really loved about the book was the atmosphere, and that I learned something about Wales, the life of Welsh people at the turn of the last century, the hardship, but it's also about family. Some children are nicer than others, to put it like that, and that really enchanted me, that kind of, these little anecdotes. And because it was a much shorter book, I think I struggled less with the plotlessness than I did with Prodigal Summer. I think it was a beautifully written book, and I didn't love it, but I really enjoyed reading it. And the last book I want to discuss is something completely different, a non-fiction book essay collection by Anne Helen Petersen, Too Fat, Too Slutty, Too Loud, which was published last year. Anne Helen Petersen is an American journalist, mainly writing about pop culture in outlets like, for instance, BuzzFeed. And this collection looks at female celebrities, from politicians like Hillary Clinton to athletes like Serena Williams, And they all have in common that they are too something, too fat or too slutty or too loud or too, and explores the ways in which we look in our society at women, and how we treat women who are just too much of something. There's a chapter, for instance, about Kim Kardashian, and that chapter is called Too Pregnant. And it explores the idea, how do we think that a pregnancy should look like in the public sphere, the baby bump, really cute, and the rest. But we don't want to see the swollen ankles and the swollen face and the water building up in the legs and stuff like that. So I thought this was a brilliant collection, really interesting to look at these various aspects of all the things that we as a society think that women are too much of, how we define certain, things that the borders within which women have to act. If you're interested in the topic of feminism, if you're interested in how the public image of women, of celebrity women, is contextualized, and how it is framed and also limited, then I can highly, highly recommend this collection. So these were the books of my recent reads on Sundays. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. As always, I'm looking forward to talking to you down in the comments, and I'll see you all soon in the next one. Bye-bye.